Hey, welcome to my talk. It's whatever Internet Explorer does what it wants. After seeing some of the presentations here this week, I think I could have changed it to just another HTA talk, but you'll see that coming on. My name's Aaron Heikkila. I've been an IT professional about 10 years or so. I've been with Target for 3 years as an incident handler. I work on the response team there. I investigate cases and alerts and see what's going on. I really like PowerShell, as anybody that knows me probably knows that. I like forensics and Microsoft products. I specialize in those. A little bit of a disclaimer, if you use any of the information from this talk, I'm not responsible for you breaking your environment. Hopefully I give you some good comprehensive info so that you can actually do something useful with it, and I represent myself. So this is just a quick summary of kind of what led me to this talk. We were encountering some issues at Target with HTA docs, and even though we had put some defense in depth with our blocking, we were still seeing alerts coming in, and so I investigated to figure out why we were still getting alerts. So that's pretty quick and simple. So I'll cover what an HTA document is, why we actually care about HTA documents, a little bit on how you might hunt for HTAs, and how you'll want to block them because they're bad. So first, how many of you know what an HTA document is? All right, that's a decent number of people. An HTA doc is an HTML application. That's what the HTA stands for. It runs with a binary called MSHTA. That's Microsoft HTML application. Normally, HTML only runs in the context of a browser, so it doesn't have access to system resources. It can't run PowerShell or VBScript or anything on the host. And that's important because if you're browsing the web and all of a sudden they could start detonating PowerShell on your host, that's a little bit of a security concern. So the MSHTA app allows the fusion of an HTML GUI with the underlying system resources on a host. And so MSHTA is a fully trusted application that provides the access. And like I said, it's VBScript, JScript, PowerShell, and JavaScript, and really anything on the host is accessible for these applications. A lot of people use HTAs to make like dashboards and other things, or sysadmin tools. So why do we care about HTA docs? Well, HTAs are standard on all Windows systems. The MSHTA is there, and if you double-click an HTA doc, it will automatically launch with MSHTA. That's way more attack surface than even like a Word doc or something like that, because it is on every system. A lot of users are unfamiliar with what an HTA doc is, so if they see this HTA presented to them as a malicious lure or something like that, they might click it just because they don't know what it is, and they might not be afraid of it because they just don't know. HTAs are extremely powerful. As I've been saying, they have access to all the system resources. They're very sneaky. Who thought it was a good idea for you to be able to launch an HTA document without a taskbar icon or a window? But they made it that way, as you'll see an example coming up. And then the MSHTA binary itself, you can feed it a remote URL, so it'll actually reach out to the cloud and detonate the HTA document. And that's just even crazier. And then due to the trusted nature of the binary, it bypasses AppLocker most of the time. So a lot of pen testers and bad guys use it because it'll always work. Here's an example of an HTA document I used for some testing. Highlighted, I have the start with the windows minimized and without a taskbar icon. So if you ran this, it'd be in Task Manager, and that'd be the only way you could actually see this is running on the system. So if a user accidentally runs it, they're never even going to shut it off because they don't even know what happened with it. The example here is just downloading a page from Google, and then it's saving it to disk, nothing too fancy. But if you combine it with the second example here, I'm doing a similar thing. I'm actually not hiding, I'm not hiding in this one. But this is using WMI to detonate calc on the machine. So with the two, you could download a file and detonate the malware, and it'd be completely hidden. So HTA documents are really versatile for attack lures. The bad guys can send them as email attachments. That's a common method that's been seen. they can be used as drive-by downloads. That's like malvertising or exploit kits can be used to download the HTA documents. And then sometimes, on a rare occasion, you'll see it embedded in like a Word doc macro or something. So the initial malware might use the MSHTA to download an additional HTA document and gain further functionality. Have you guys seen the attack matrix? A lot of people know what it is. I think more and more people are familiar with it now. A lot of talks and stuff are bringing it up. If you're not really familiar, I don't know if you can see it very well because it's small, but it's attacker techniques, and they're all mapped to different categories or phases of the attacker kind of life cycle. And so HTAs are so prevalent, they earn their own spot on this matrix. If you ever are curious about figuring out what bad guys do, just go to the attack matrix and start clicking through the different items. If you go in, they'll give you examples of how it's used, how to mitigate it, how to detect and hunt for it. And then they also provide real-world examples and white papers at the bottom. It's kind of like Wikipedia, you know, go to the sources and start reading what they're talking about. So in the real world, a lot of people have been seen using the MSHTA or HTA documents as an exploit. Fin7 is a financially motivated threat group. They've been seen utilizing it. Latent Bot is a really sneaky malware. It's been around for a while. Not a lot of people know what's up with that. But that's been seen using MSHTA. Muddy Water is an Iranian group, and they use it. And then pen testers love it. If you went to Dave Kennedy's keynote talk, he mentioned how he uses MSHTA in his Unicorn framework. He's got the ability to generate random HTA documents and lures. And then there's CovTR. The MSISAC, that's the Multi-State Information Sharing Analysis Center, claims that over 50% of the malware they've seen this year from all the organizations they've gathered from, over 50% have been CovTR infections. So this is a really prevalent malware. It's all over the place. It might be in your organization or in somebody you know's organization or on their home computers. And so CovTR utilizes the HTA document. CovTR has been seen doing phishing and malvertising. Malvertising's when they might go and watch like a pirate sports stream or something kind of nefarious, and an ad will pop before the stream saying, "Oh, you need to update your Flash player to watch this," and so it presents a screen just like that. It's a very real-looking Adobe update screen. And so a lot of people will go, "Oh yeah, I need to update my Flash player so I can watch this illegal stream I want to watch." And as you can see, it has flashplayer.hta. Most users don't know what that is and just want to update and watch the stream. So other popular sites also have the malvertising. Forbes, Facebook, Skype, Spotify, all kinds of these popular sites all serve up the CovTR malware. And so it's also a fileless malware. Once it infects the computer, it resides in the registry. So antivirus has a really hard time detecting and cleaning it. I've seen a lot of CovTR infections where the machine will be infected for months and it'll be a really old CovTR campaign, and maybe 6 months later, finally the antivirus will be like, "Oh, I guess that's a bad file." And so it detects the dropper, but the computer's still infected and has been infected for a long time. So a lot of people might not really think that CovTR is a really threatening malware because its primary role is to perform click fraud. And click fraud's where it'll download advertisements and then click and generate revenue for the attacker. And so people don't really consider it a mainstream threat, even though it is very prolific and infecting, over 50% of the malware cases. So it has full rat capability though. So it can download additional modules and get additional functionality on the fly. And this would happen potentially if an attacker realizes that the rat has landed on like an important organization or government computer. And I don't want that to be my organization, and I don't want it to be your organization either. So I think it's kind of important. There's a few ways we can hunt for HTAs. We can look for inbound attachments in our email systems. You could see if people have received HTAs recently. You can watch for HTAs to be downloaded in the proxy logs. And then you can also stack the MSHTA processes If you're not doing this, this is one of the most effective ways to hunt for things. You stack the event execution processes from the entire environment. You forward them to some kind of like elk stack or Splunk. And then you're able to observe things like the parent-child associations. Specifically in this case, Covter would detonate PowerShell from the MSHTA process. And so you can very clearly see that in the process execution logs. And that would be a very big indication that either Covter or some other malware was executing on a system. You could also look at the file names for the execution. The file names could be like flashplayer.hta or really random string. If you saw in Dave Kennedy's talk, he was generating random strings for his names. And you could also look for it to be reaching out to remote URLs to detonate the HTA files. So there's some very basic blocks that people will often put in. The first one is to set the file association for the HTA doc. They'll set it to open with something like Notepad instead of the default MSHTA program. And you would want to also filter inbound emails and make sure that HTAs aren't just being sent to your users. And then blocking at the proxy is also a really effective way to mitigate the HTAs because, like I said, some malware could use the remote URL feature to download additional payloads to the system. And so if you block it at the proxy, it'll also mitigate those kinds of activities. Because on the command line with MSHTA, if you feed it the URL and you explicitly call MSHTA, that will bypass the file association that's occurring. And you want to push out these changes via SCCM. Most of you, if you're running Windows, will have the configuration manager to deploy the configurations to the environment. There's a default setting in GPO that you can use to set the file associations on all the computers. So, defense in depth is really important. The issue that I saw was we had it configured so that Notepad would open the HTA documents, but I was still seeing Covter infections and things coming into the network. And we didn't understand. I knew those shouldn't be happening because if the user opens the HTA document, it should just pop in Notepad and nothing should happen. So the question was, why? Why were we seeing an alert for further down in the kill chain that should have been mitigated higher up? And so as a good analyst, I went and performed remote root cause analysis, and I could see that the files that were being detonated were downloading to a temporary internet cache and then executing from the temporary internet cache. So I was able to come up with the assumption that the open instead of save function in Internet Explorer was being used to execute the files. That allowed me to then replicate the activity. I went and found an HTA that was sitting on the internet that I knew was benign, and I actually went and detonated it safely on a machine. I clicked open, and it worked, and I was like, oh, so that's definitely what's happening in this case. But I didn't really understand why for a long time. I had to look around quite a bit and do a lot of research, and eventually I came across what's called the MIME type database. Are many of you familiar with MIME types? Yeah, that's a decent amount. So the MIME type is the Multipurpose Internet Mail Extension Program. Multipurpose Internet Mail Extensions. The MIME type is typically thought of being used with SMTP standards, but really HTTP or any network communication protocol will follow like the MIME type RFCs. And in this case, Internet Explorer respects this MIME type database in registry. There you can see what the registry key structure looks like. This is under the HKey classes root hive. And so normally you would think it would save the file to disk for HTAs and then use the file association that's set in registry. But when you click open, it treats it like a live web document, and so it chooses the application based on a different registry. So here's a little bit what it looks like. I queried the application HTA, and that points you to a class ID, and that class ID is a GUID that then you can query, and you can see how it's still configured to detonate MSHTA. And you'd think it'd be this simple, right? But there's actually more to, because we could change this key now in addition to setting the file association, and that would block the additional behavior. But you also need to be sure to block it in the 64-bit, or this is actually the 32-bit Hive within Windows. So you'd want to make sure you change both. Yep. And that's about it. So ultimately, if your organization isn't using MSHTA for anything legitimate, you'd want to lock it down using App Locker or the software restriction policies. You have to be kind of careful with this because there are some underlying systems that might be using the MSHTA, like on Windows 10, there's some weird subsystems. So you'd want to be really careful when deploying those configurations. But this is by far the best method if you can really restrict and prevent anything that's not supposed to be using MSHTA. So, yep, make sure that nobody in your company is using it. In large organizations, there'll often be somebody somewhere using it. That's it. Questions? That's the Microsoft HTML application. So MSHTA is a native binary within System 32 that is used to execute. Right, you can see the path there. It's actually in two locations. There are two because a 32-bit application will run under the syswow 64, and then on a 64-bit system, the System 32 MSHTA will be used. Say that again. The HTA? Oh, so HKey classes root is a set of all the classes on a system that are defined. So I don't have an example up right now, but so there's many types of classes on a system that they're all different types in programming that are defined, and so HTA is both a yes. So within the classes root drive, which has a general set of classes, there's actually the subset of the MIME type. And so this MIME database is a special set of information within the general class definitions. Yeah. Well, and so this is an association. So when the application identifies, oh, it's this type of MIME, I need to use these types of applications to open it. And it creates that association so it knows where to go on disk to launch the application. Yeah. And there's several, if you look within this path, there's actually a ton of applications there for, like if it was a Windows Media file, it would download it and go, oh, I should open it with Windows Media Player or something like that. Yes. Or, well, technically with MIME, it would be a MIME type. It doesn't respect the extension. So if the HTTP connection, when you download it, the connection will actually have a MIME type defined within it. And so you could have you could have a .txt, but still provide it with a MIME type. And so it would respect the MIME type over the file association. Yeah, the file extensions can be, yeah, depending on the situation, they're pretty ignored or useless. Cool. Any other questions? There's a lot of ways you could do that. You could train them to launch it on the command line. It's kind of iffy. You could create batch files that would automatically type the command line, so they just double-click a batch file instead of the document itself. You could also, depending on the scenario, provide entitlements where they could be allowed unrestricted access to MSHTA. So there's a lot of different ways, depending on your business processes, that you could configure it. Any other questions? Oh. Yeah. It depends whether or not you're doing SSL intercept with your proxy. I would highly recommend performing that. A lot of main proxies will do that, like Blue Coat will perform different inspection like that for you. Oh. You first, Nick. Mhm. I have not done that kind of research yet, but I would think that maybe Edge would do something like this. I think Skype or maybe Spotify, because the apps I think are seen launching those kinds of things as well. And so setting the configuration here would definitely mitigate those additional applications because they'll do the same MIME type lookup in the registry, and then you'll already have it mitigated when it goes, oh, I'm going to resolve and still open with Notepad instead of something else. This so there's a lot of sysadmin tools. Sometimes developers will just make something custom where, oh, it's really easy. I know HTML, so I'm going to write an HTML front end for this tool instead of doing something that's more complex or using like a different library to generate their forms. And then sometimes developers will facilitate like a normal business process where they make a dashboard or something that automatically queries a whole bunch of information from the network and then presents it on the screen. Any other questions? All right, thank you.